Hi, welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going to be covering how I shade, consisting of clothes, skin, and hair. Okay, and first we're going to start with the skin. I personally chose a pink color just so it would look brighter and more vivid, but overall I can also use a purple or green or blue type of color. It really also does depend on the mood that you're trying to set, and it also depends on where the light is coming from. For now, it could be coming from the two sides, left and right. However, it doesn't always really matter as long as you can separate the colors. For example, since I'm a lineless artist, I choose just to separate the colors also with the shading, not so much depending on lines to separate my colors. Another major note that I wanted to put out there, you would basically shade in areas that would make sense, at least for my art that it's lineless. The way I would do it is like, okay, since her bangs would shadow her forehead, there's going to be shadow there. Okay, since there's no line dividing the head from the neck, there's going to be shading there regardless of where the light is coming from. There's a bracelet, okay, there's going to be shading below the bracelet, and if the hair overlaps the arm, like right now her right arm is being overlapped by hair, then there would be shading there. And then since the dress cuts off and then you see her legs, since like let's say her ankles there would be shading there. So it's basically like that, like things that you would consider like, hey, it's a cutoff, so there's going to be shading there. So it divides the two colors, for example, the clothing from the skin, or like a bracelet or a little detail from the skin. Things like that that would provide simple shading. As well as if there's a crease in the eye, or there's a specific expression. This is mostly just because I'm a lineless artist. Typically, a line art artist would put in these details with their line art. But since I'm lineless, I depend more on the shading in order to make these lines and divisions, if that makes sense. And moving on to the clothing shading, for this one it depends more on wrinkles. Obviously it's not going to go into full detail since it's a more simplified style, but you can see where the dress would wrinkle at her waist. Here we see more of a stretch outward because that is where typically the dress would fold and then wrinkle. It also does follow a lot of the steps that I would take for the skin. For example, that it would blur in some areas but then keep a firmer shape in other sections. However, for this, you can't fully jump around a lot for the shading color. I would recommend sticking more to just a color that better complements the clothing. For example, right now I have purple, so then I chose like a bluer color that's dark, if that makes sense. Okay, and next is the hair. The hair is more or less just to give it form because right now it's like just a big old blob. So we don't know what's going on up until the shading point. So for example, you could see that her bangs have an M shape. For the M, for the inner hair, I would recommend using a much darker color than what you're going to use to shade the rest of the hair. So for example, what you're going to use for the hair on the back, that is what you would use for the M, the inner hair. And then when shading, since you're going to give it shape, this is more or less just for lineless artists, but I'm almost certain that you could also use it for line art, is that you're going to give it shape with the shading. For example, right now, you know that there's bangs because there's much more shading underneath the bangs that give it form and separates it from the rest of the hair flowing down over her shoulders. While I also add strands just to clarify its hair and it's not just a blob, and that there's more detail basically with that. And then from there, you could also add more gradient just to give it more of a nice touch at the end. I would suggest going from bottom to up, so then it gives it more of a sense of shading towards the bottom, so then it could give it more of a focus on the face. And you also have a light coming from the top. While I also do little arches, I'm not fully sure how to describe these, but it's a lot of detail that you see in almost all hairs. It's almost like in all hairs where they have those arches of shading. It's typically with lighter colors, but since I'm just going with a simplified version of my art, I'm just going to do it with the shading color instead of the light color. But overall, it's the same idea. And that has been all. I'm very sorry for my voice because like it's been dry. But essentially, I hope that has given you insight on how I shade. I would have shown lighting as well because I didn't really include it because this was more of a simplified style and I don't really tend to do lighting with this one. But that's more complicated. And I thought since I'm just showing the basics, I would stick to a more simplified style. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know and I'll clarify the best I can. But remember, everyone has different methods to shading. You're welcome to do however you like for shading. This is just more or less if you would like to understand my way of shading, or if you would like to see another technique so then you could take it. Completely up to you. But thank you for watching. Bye bye.